The Afghanistan Papers was a seminal moment in my political awakening.
Yeah.
Just how would you describe the Afghanistan Papers?
Yeah, it's great that you bring that up. A lot of people don't know about this, but the fact is this was the mainstream media, actually, the Washington Post, doing good reporting and looking at how the United States really was led by both civilian and military officials, into a long, forever war that they didn't know how to actually win. And it is very apparent in these papers, right? With primary, sources here, helping Americans see actually that not only did the generals not have a theory of victory, but that in a way it was malpractice, right? Because, deciding to kind of go forward and continuing to have Americans lose their lives in a war that they didn't have an answer for, it's just kind of abominable, actually. I think malpractice is really the right word here.
Oh yeah, if not worse, like horrific, absolutely horrific. And Washington Post did a great report, and there's a book about it. I encourage everyone to read it, and it'll just blow your mind about how it's like we're lied to just constantly. Are you surprised that no generals resigned when Biden put forth his plan to withdraw? And maybe it was not a good plan, and all the generals went forward with it anyway? Because in the past, generals would resign at a protest. That didn't happen here. Are you surprised that or no?
Not really. And I'll be honest, I don't think that this was a case in which the generals should have resigned. I mean, they were trying to make the best of a bad situation. And again, the withdrawal implementation was certainly botched. But I think what a lot of people in the establishment, both military and civilian, were opposed to was actually the fact that we were withdrawing in the first place. And you saw that yesterday in the testimony where Milley was kind of pained to say, that he basically, needed to carry out these orders, that the Doha Agreement had put it into a position where there were going to be lots of challenges if we remained, because I think a lot of people wanted to stay. And people talk about how we should have had 2,500 troops there, and they should have stayed until certain conditions were met. But again, this would have meant a resumption of the war with the Taliban. It would have meant more Americans dying for a war that we didn't have an answer to. And part of that is because of the expanded war aims that meant it was almost inevitable we were going to have what Milley called yesterday strategic failure, because we were not going to be able to nation build at a reasonable cost for the United States in a place that was so inhospitable to the type of things that we were trying to develop. And I think people have a hard time understanding that, this was not, Germany or Japan, something that they often mention as analogies, like, oh, we could have just stayed there. And then, their suggestion is that we'll have South Korea, Japan, Germany, after their wars. No, this is not a place that was going to become those types of flourishing democracies.
What's the difference?
I mean, look.
Why not? What was different?
This is a place that does not have the same kind of traditions in terms of industrialization, in terms of the kind of development of markets and the kind of broader, what you might call liberal tradition. And I don't mean that in the American sense, but I mean that in the sense of, the kind of values of the West. It's a place that is unbelievably impoverished. I was there in 2008, 2009. And, some of the things that you see here, it's almost as if the world hadn't changed in parts of Afghanistan since Alexander went through there, over 2,000 years ago.
I don't think that's an exaggeration. So let me ask this. Why did Trump want to get out?
Yeah, look, the Trump administration should be proud of the fact that they ended America's longest war. And President Trump and Ambassador Khalilzad, with the Doha Agreement that they signed, I think really helped support America's best interests here. This was a forever war that was not going to end well, and it needed to end as soon as possible because, again, why fight a war where you don't have a theory of victory, where we're only getting costs? This war cost us 2,400 brave Americans and, $2 trillion. Why continue to do that? And I think they recognize that. And I think Republicans.
But he didn't get out. But he didn't get out, though, right?
Well, but again, the reason why he didn't get out was because the election happened, and the Doha Agreement didn't specify we were going to leave until May. Again, there's a difference between withdrawing precipitously, which is what some people claimed happened in August, and withdrawing along a timeline that actually made sense, which is what the Doha Agreement provided for. So I don't blame Trump for not getting out. There was a careful plan, according to the Doha Agreement, that the United States, if it had followed, would have had a better result. And so I don't blame Trump here.
This is actually pretty important. I want to make sure I get this down right, because if one of the criticisms against Biden is this botched withdrawal, well, what's the what was Trump's plan or whatever? So I want to make sure I get this right. So this Doha Agreement, what did it say exactly? And if it had a timeline, isn't the argument that the Taliban just would have waited until the timeline was up and then boom, took it over the next day?
Well, again, but that would have meant that Americans would have been out of harm's way, right? And I think that if we had withdrawn according to the schedule in May, instead of having that delay because of the Biden review, I think we would have been in a better position, or at least the Taliban would have been in a less advantageous position to do what happened, which was to be rolling into Kabul as the United States was still there. So I think we should have followed the original Doha Agreement, and that would have worked out better for the United States. That's not to say that the government in Kabul would have remained, because, again, the problem, of course, here is that this was something that was going to happen as soon as we left, and we should have been out before it happened rather than in while it happened.
That's right. So why did the Biden administration not follow the Doha Agreement that Trump laid out?
Well, they wanted to do a review, and I think, frankly, a lot of people didn't really want to carry out the policy. I think that there are all kinds of people asking, well, how could we avoid this, actually? And ultimately, and I laid this out in a New York Times op-ed at the time, ultimately I think that the political incentives were such that the Biden administration couldn't really avoid it. And we should thank Trump, actually, for that, because he created a situation in which America needed to leave, and that was in the best interest of the United States.
You wrote an interesting thing on your Twitter about the difference between generals and a civilian leader making these decisions. And I think about this also with COVID as well, but maybe we'll table that. But why should we have a civilian as commander-in-chief and not just do whatever the generals always say?
I mean, the most important thing is that civilians have a better understanding and connection to America's interests and what the American people want, right? And there's an electoral connection, right? If the president decides to do something in terms of American foreign policy, ultimately there is a way in which the United States, in which the American people can hold the president accountable. But also the president is in a better position to balance different interests, economic interests, security interests. They also have a wider array of experiences than the military, which military leaders are experts in the management of violence. That doesn't make them experts on kind of the trade-offs and balances among lots of different kind of aspects of American life, economic, social, and political.
Yeah, so my COVID analogy is the epidemiologists at the CDC are experts in the spread of a respiratory disease, but that doesn't make them the best people to balance all the other factors that go into play with a potential lockdown or something like that. That's my metaphor.
Yeah, exactly.
All that being said, why would you want this job as ambassador to Afghanistan, seeing the wake that was left with the other ambassadors that would have been before you?
Well, because I think it's important to serve the country when they ask. And when President Trump asked me to serve, it was something where you got to do it for the good of your country. And I thought it would be important to help the United States carry out a withdrawal that was in our best interest. So that's the end of the story there.
What would have been the biggest challenge of people over there on the Taliban? Like, how do you communicate with the leader of the Taliban or whoever the tribal leaders are in a given location? How do you even begin to think about that?
It's a very challenging country.
I mean, like you're just William Ruger going over. Like, how do you? I mean, that's seriously. Like, what do you talk about? Like, how do you? What do they want that you can give them when it comes to leverage or whatever? How do you? What's the most important thing to them? What's their priority?
Well, again, Ambassador Khalilzad, I think, showed how important it was to, to kind of make the best of a bad situation where the Taliban had, a lot of facts on the ground that supported their. What they wanted, and you have to make the best of it, right? Because diplomacy is trying to advance your national interests oftentimes under conditions of not having the best hand dealt to you, and you make the best of it. And I think smart diplomats get the best out of kind of support their national interest the best they can at the lowest cost, given the environment, the threat environment, and the other factors. So, again, I applaud Ambassador Khalilzad for making that happen at Doha.
Yeah, my last question for you. Let's at least learn a lesson from this war. What lesson should we learn to prevent the next forever war?
Don't let ideology blind you to the dangers and challenges of trying to remake places, and basically avoid nation building where you, if at all possible, which is basically most cases. We don't need to rebuild places for America to be secure.
Thank you, sir. William Ruger, president of the American Institute for Economic Research, Trump's nominee for ambassador to Afghanistan.